Hi there, welcome to Floating in Dreams. Today's video is going to be, do I regret decluttering any of these eyeshadow palettes? Welcome to everybody watching today. Thank you so very much for joining me. This video is going to be me going over some eyeshadow palettes that I decluttered in the past, that I gave away, threw away, whatever was the deal. And I'm going to be talking to you about them and tell you whether I regret getting rid of these or not. And that's sort of the spiel of this video. So let me get started. But before we do that, it may be good to know who I am. If you have never been here before, my name is Maaike. I live in the Netherlands. I have fair skin with a cool to neutral undertone. And this greatly influences how I feel about makeup. And it definitely goes into what I decide to declutter or not very often. I have been reviewing for more than a decade, so I know exactly what I like and what I'm looking for in products, so that's another reason why very often things end up being decluttered, because it didn't quite live up to my expectations. However, if you are interested in eyeshadow palette related content, Essence and Catrice, and getting the use out of your makeup, then that's what my channel is all about. So if you'd like to stay tuned for all of that goodness, let's get to the video. Yeah, 10 eyeshadow palettes that I've selected, and yet again, I need to preface this video by saying that a lot of the eyeshadow palettes that end up being decluttered in my makeup collection decluttering videos are usually more affordable drugstore related palettes. And it's not because drugstore is bad. I just did an entire week of drugstore videos last week, and I think the drugstore can do some really, really good makeup. It's just that for eyeshadow palettes, if it's a bit more expensive, I tend to think a little bit longer and I try to budget for those purchases, so there's a little bit more thought that goes into it. And with the drugstore, I do tend to try out a lot of drugstore makeup. I like doing full face makeup looks once a month, and very often those are the more affordable brands, because I do buy most of what you see on this channel with my own money as well. Luckily I make a little bit of money back from YouTube AdSense that I can put it back into the channel, and I sort of see that as my free to like spend makeup budget every month. But I also use it to like upgrade my materials and like everything that I use. But that does also mean that I do come into a lot of drugstore makeup for that reason. So that's why I feel my declutters in terms of eyeshadow palettes are always very like skewed against drugstore, but that doesn't mean I don't like drugstore makeup. I just wanted to make sure that everybody's clear on that. I'll pop some pictures up on the screen here so you can have a look at what these palettes look like. Some of these I had in my collection for years, and other times I didn't have them for that long. So I wanted to kick things off here by mentioning the MUA Elysium eyeshadow palette. And this palette was around for a long time, not just for sale, but also in my personal makeup collection, because the MUA Elysium palette was an exceptionally good dupe for one of my all-time favorite eyeshadow palettes that is more high-end, which is the Urban Decay Naked 3. It was very, very on point. All the shades matched quite nicely. And since the Urban Decay one was so expensive, I didn't feel like traveling with this. So I very deliberately bought this eyeshadow palette at some point when I was in the UK, so that this was the one thing I could take with me if I wanted to create that Urban Decay Naked 3 look. But I didn't have to be overly precious with it because I could break this very easily. And as the Urban Decay Naked 3 hype died down and I got a lot more palettes like it in my collection as well, this was just one that was superfluous because I had the original version. I have just learned over time that when I travel, especially when I travel, it's usually not like a job thing. It's more of a, I'm going out and have fun kind of thing, and I'm going to like see the sights and do some shopping, and I don't really feel like wearing a full face of makeup like that when, like what I normally do when I go to work on those like really long travel days, because I feel it doesn't stay, it doesn't last, and what use is it to spend a lot of time on creating a really nice eye look when you're going out and about all day and you might be hit with rain and sweat and everything. So I just like to bring a very small amount of eye makeup. It's usually like a ColourPop Super Shock that I tend to bring. And an eyeshadow palette like this with 12 colors so I can create several looks, I've just found doesn't really happen for me. So that's why the MUA, even though I did really enjoy the formula and I did really enjoy this palette and I really enjoyed the color story, it just became superfluous in my makeup collection, which is why I got rid of this one. However, I have since purchased some more of the newer things that MUA currently does, and they are still really doing some really nice things. So if you are looking for some good affordable eyeshadow palettes, then MUA is a good one. I have been able to find them online now. One of you actually had this tip that Notino in the EU actually carries MUA, where it will ship to different locations. So if your website, like if your country has access to Notino and you're in the EU, it may be actually quite easy to get a hold of. I got mine from Superdrug because in the UK it is most widely available. I believe even Sephora UK stocks the brand, which is great. So I don't regret decluttering this one, and I also don't really regret decluttering the next thing, which is the e.l.f. bite-sized eyeshadow palettes. I had 3 of these. I had the green one, and there was this like cappuccino inspired one, and I think I also had the rosy toned one. Like I had 2 of the neutrally ones and then the one with the greens and yellow, because those were the ones that really appealed to me. Did I have the blue one? I'm not sure. I may have only had one of the neutral ones and then the blue, the acai one. That's the one I have. The blue one, the green one, and one of the neutral tones. Like the cappuccino, I don't remember what it was called, but you'll see the picture here because I think I reviewed them in one go. And these were okay, but in the end, I didn't really understand the hype that these things got. I have other e.l.f. eyeshadow that I just love. My Earth and Ocean has been in my makeup collection for like 5 years until this day. It is still one of my all-time favorite drugstore eyeshadow palettes. Their newer Celestial Winter palette, it is back, I have seen, is another stunning palette as well. So as e.l.f. can do really good eyeshadow, but these bite-sized palettes just weren't quite it for me. They got a lot of hype, but I felt that the looks I could create was very limited. These had a very big tendency to break, not just the shadows, but also the packaging was incredibly flimsy. I think they still do this. You can still buy these bite-sized palettes. So for how affordable they are, I don't think you can fault them. But over here, because e.l.f. isn't a EU-based brand, everything I can get my hands on is imported from the United States, which means we have to buy e.l.f. at a markup. And the markup that I have to pay for e.l.f. products makes it as expensive as me getting Essence or Catrice. And then I would much rather buy something from Essence and Catrice because I can get that much more easily in store. There's only like a few places here that have a display where you can find e.l.f., which luckily I'm in a bigger city so I can find it, but it's always incredibly picked over. So if I want to buy something from e.l.f., and especially if it's one of their newer releases, I have to go online, and then you're stuck with the shipping and handling fees and all that. Like, luckily they have an EU-based website, so it's not as expensive as it used to be. But it means I can't test the products in advance, and with Essence and Catrice I can. So for me, e.l.f. Bite Size wasn't quite worth it. And I understand why it got a lot of hype, because I think e.l.f. is still one of the more affordable brands that does some really good things, but they seem to be more hyped up for the things they are copying from other brands, and their own like creations aren't hyped up as much. And I feel that that's a bit of a shame, because I have found through doing a full face of e.l.f. earlier this year that the very hyped up makeup that everybody talks about weren't my favorite products from the brand. The things I ended up liking were the things people were talking about very negatively, or they were things that I haven't heard anybody talking about at all. So I think I just have slightly different preferences when it comes to e.l.f. as a brand. So yeah, the bite-sized ones, very successful launch for the brand for sure, but they didn't need to have a place in my collection. And then this one, this is so nostalgic to me. It's the PUR Cosmetics My Little Pony palette, and I don't remember how I got my hands on this. I think this was a Beauty Bay purchase. I think at some point in time, Beauty Bay had PUR, or PUR, or I don't know how to pronounce this. P-U-R, that's how it's spelled. And they did, like, they were quite popular there for a minute. Like, a lot of people were talking about their palettes, and they did all of these collabs. They had a Barbie collab years before we got the Barbie movie. So this was definitely a brand that was talked about at the time. And I remember that around 2017, 2018, I decided that I wanted to start wearing colorful eyeshadow. I just like flipped a switch and I was like, I want to get out of my comfort zone. I want to play around with colorful eyeshadow, rainbows, and see what it looks like. I was definitely influenced with the online beauty community and how a lot of creators do their makeup. And I just wanted to see if I could make it work for me, because I was a neutral, cool tone neutral with a red lip kind of gal any time of day. Like that was what I was wearing for the most part. And so I tried this palette to get into color, because even though it's not blindingly colorful, perhaps, it has some neutrals as well, but it was the perfect palette for me to learn what colors go together, how I can build a look, what colors I like to use where on my lid. It was perfect for it. And this was another one of those palettes that was incredibly clever in its layout, because you could use it as quads, you could use it as a 6-pan, you could really mix and match these shades whichever way you liked, and you would always get a look that worked. So for me, this was just a really good palette that sort of gave me the training wheels to figure out how to apply and use color on my eyelids, and then I was able to take the plunge and head into full-on rainbow color stories and do all that. So I know I don't wear a lot of colorful makeup. Like today we're wearing pink. We're wearing pink. It's like pretty pink. The lighting isn't the best today. Like we have a lot of sun coming in, so it's a little blown out. But it's all down to this palette. This palette taught me the things. So there is still a part of me that really enjoys this palette for that reason. But because I ventured out and took the training wheels off, you could say, I now have far better quality, colorful color stories in my makeup collection. I have some Blend Bunny things. I have some like Slush Cosmetics. They have announced on Instagram that they're closing down, but that's one of my favorite rainbow palettes of all time. I've got a lot of the like Melt things and like Fantasy Cosmetica and Unearthly Cosmetics. Like I have more colorful things now that I still really like playing with. So for me, this palette was incredibly important in my makeup journey, but as time progressed, I just found other things that I felt had better formula, and that's why this one fell by the wayside. So do I regret decluttering it? Not from a quality because I want to use it standpoint, but I definitely regret getting rid of it because it's, you know, it just had a special place for me. But once my makeup memory box started overflowing, I had to take some decisions, and I was like, you know what? I still have the pictures, I have the memories, I don't have to keep around everything in my life. So I have peace with having gotten rid of this one, but it still kind of hurts me a little bit. The next palette I actually have here, so then you're like, wait, Micah, if you've decluttered it, because I actually pulled it out to film another video that I will be filming right after this one, but it's the Urban Decay Born to Run. If you saw my most recent decluttering for eyeshadow palettes last March, I decluttered nearly every single one of my Urban Decay eyeshadow palettes because I wasn't reaching for them. But this is another one of those things where, you know, Urban Decay as a brand has been so pivotal in my makeup journey that I can, like, I have a special box just with all of my Urban Decay stuff. Just with all of the Urban Decay palettes that I ever had. There's one that I actually did get rid of over time, which I already talked about in one of these videos. But the Urban Decay Born to Run is in that box. It's living there. As an example, I'm going to be pulling this one in because I know a lot of people purchase it at the time. And so there are shades in this palette that I think I still want to showcase at some point in time. And that's why it's up here and it's lying right next to me. But the Urban Decay Born to Run, I decluttered because as much hype as this got, this was where sort of Urban Decay started to change for me, because this was the Urban Decay palette that year everybody was talking about. And I tried it and I was like, I like it okay, but I mainly like this part of the color story, and everything else was a little bit too warm toned. And then I figured out that this is very similar in terms of the colors we get to the colors we got in the Urban Decay Vice 3, which I also own. The difference is that the Urban Decay Vice 3 has these kind of colorful shades combined with cool tone neutrals. So guess what I prefer? The cool tone neutral one. So this was just never perfect. I was never reaching for this. I know this is a palette that has shown up in Project Pans and everybody was loving it, which is why I think maybe some of you also still have this lying about. But I don't regret putting this away in a closet to look at. Ooh, let me put it back. To like look at whenever I want to look at it. You know, it didn't really serve a purpose in my makeup collection to begin with. It's one of those things that I kind of bought because I was at a point in time where I was collecting all of the Urban Decay palettes. And I've definitely gotten out of this collector's mentality. It sometimes still crops up. I'm currently really having to hold back on getting all of the Fantasy Cosmetica palettes out there because I know that the color stories that aren't quite right for me, that don't really pull me in and pull on my heartstrings, are going to be the one that after a certain point in time, if the brand becomes less popular, I'm probably going to be interested in decluttering. And that's definitely what happened with me and my Urban Decay collection for sure. Especially the Naked palette line. I just kind of bought it blindly without really considering, is this right for me? I was just testing it out and having fun with it. And I think it was a fun stage to have, but this palette was definitely part of that stage in my life. And as good as the formula is, because it is one of the like better Urban Decay palettes, I think, it was definitely on point with what a lot of people are looking for, which is why, again, I think a lot of people still have this in their collections. But for me, it wasn't quite right. So I really don't regret getting rid of this one. Next up, the Milani Soft and Sultry. And the Milani Soft and Sultry was one that I had completely forgotten existed in this world at some point. But at some point in time, again, the Milani palette was so hyped up and raved about. And I'm gonna preface this one by saying I do not regret decluttering this. Because everybody was saying how cool toned the Soft and Sultry was. I only found like 3 cool tones in that palette in the end. It was quite dark. It did have a really lovely formula, but that's why I ended up not reaching for it as much. And I feel by now I have other cool tone color stories that pass this one by a mile away, so that's why I ended up decluttering it. However, there was another caveat with this one, where the Milani Soft and Sultry, in order to get my hands on it, I think I bought this through an EU retailer. I think I got it from like Boozy Shop or Beauty Bay or something. And this was like at the very early stages when Milani was first being sold here. And the markup on this thing, like in the US, this palette retailed for $15. And I remember paying 27 euros and 50 cents. And that had a discount on it. Because I think at some point I even saw it going for as much as $32.50, which is twice as much as what you would pay for it in the US. So, and I think this is also why I sometimes felt disappointed with some of the e.l.f. things I've tried. Like, you need to ask yourself, like, if you have to pay almost twice as much money as the people who are creating the hype, you're gonna have a different perspective on what you find worth it, I feel. And I think it also goes with EU-based products that are sold in the US. I know that a lot of Essence and Catrice stuff is marked up a little bit compared to what we pay for it here. Not a lot, but just a little bit. Like if you look at the exchange rate, and I think that that's also factored into these prices, like they up the price a little bit, so no matter the exchange rate, the brand is going to make a profit. And that goes with, you know, for the products that are being sold here as well. So I think that with the Milani Soft and Sultry, if I had paid just 15 euros for it, I think I would have felt differently about it. And I would have had it in my collection for a much longer time. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I think that that also goes into the decisions that we make when it comes to buying makeup and loving the makeup we love. I'm more willing to put effort into making something work that was more expensive than something that was quite cheap. And that I'm like, meh, okay, I'll pass it on. But then if it's like a Natasha Denona palette, I'm like, oh, can I rearrange this? Can I do this with it? Can I use a different brush? Can I use a different technique? Like, I'm willing to put more effort into it because I spent more money on it. Maybe I'm the only person who works like that, but that's how things go on in my brain. And so the Milani Soft and Sultry, I really do not regret getting rid of this one for that reason as well. And then this one, this is a bit of a weird one because I have no clue anymore what this thing was called. And I don't even know whether I have a good enough picture of this because I bought this way back in the day. And it's a Dior palette that I found in duty free. So this was like one of their like travel limited edition things, and it had 8 shades in this little purple box with like this like stitching on it. It was like a little Dior clutch bag. That's what it looked like. But it was just such a random array of colors, and I kept it around for years because there were 1 or 2 shades that were very unique to my collection. But then I just never ended up using it. It was Dior. I bought it on a trip. So I definitely, like, I very often buy makeup on trips and then I have the memory there. So that sometimes makes it easier or like more difficult for me to actually get rid of things. But I do feel that this Dior palette was actually pretty good. Like, it had good quality eyeshadow. It's just the color story didn't really come together. All of the shades had like a similar texture. Like, this was back in the day when everything was satin, and it came with these like weird sponge tip applicators, so that made it feel a little bit cheap for something that was as expensive as this. But yeah, no, I don't regret no longer having this one in my collection. And then this again, something I hope I can find a picture on my blog for, because this is from back in the day where I didn't take pictures of the products before I used them, so I didn't have pristine pictures very often. That was a learning curve to first take the pictures and then use it. But yeah, the Makeup Designery eyeshadow quad, and this is something that I was influenced to buy. I remember this. So there was a YouTuber I used to watch. I don't remember her name. It was very early YouTube days, and I was very new to my makeup journey. And Makeup Designery was a brand that I think they are still around, but they are more of a makeup school. Like they sell makeup courses. They're based in New York. But they started their own brand at some point. It was online only, and this was one of the first purchases I did in the US as well. I remember that much. And it came with this little makeup bag, the palette, and then 4 single shadows that you can put inside the palette, and a red lipstick in the shade Ladybug. I still remember that. And this was a stunning little palette, but it was all matte. But I kept this around for years until I bought like one of the Urban Decay Naked Basics palettes. I had this one as my neutral matte palette that I can just whack a shimmer on top of and I'm out the door kind of thing. This was a really nice classic makeup look. I remember the quality being great. I had this in my collection for so long. And then it just kind of fell by the wayside. Nobody was talking about this brand anymore either. And it was just getting old. And as much as an enjoyment I got out of it in my early makeup career, there were just other things that replaced it in my collection that gave me the similar look and formulas that I slightly preferred. So that's why this one ended up going away. But yeah, I saw this on my list and I was like, oh, yeah. Like, I just have nostalgic memories with this one. Like, it's just one of those things where I'm like looking back and it was just such a start. And that red lipstick was one of the first like classic red lipsticks I owned. And it's the red lipstick that kind of got it started for me. Like, that's the red lipstick that I used to wear all the time. And now, of course, I have lots of other things. But yeah, that red lipstick taught me that I look good in a red lipstick. Viseart Sultry Muse, the big one. They now do this in a small version, but the Sultry Muse is the palette I chose from Viseart because I wanted to try the brand. And this was before they did all the like smaller pan things and the cardboard packaging. I bought this when all Viseart did were the bigger Plastic Pro palettes. That's how they got started. And they were like, what, 70, 80 euros? Like, this is the first time I paid more than like 50, 55 euros for an eyeshadow palette. I remember. This was like before the Natasha Denonas and the Pat McGrath came around. And this looked really stunning as a concept. I remember seeing a video from Emily Noel, who I used to watch a lot back in the day. And she was like showcasing it in her videos and it looked really pretty on her. And I was like, okay, I think if I want to try this brand, because everybody went for the matte one, and I had already figured out that I wasn't a matte shadow girly, so that I wanted to go for something with a bit more shimmer. The issue with the Sultry was that it was very satin and every shade in it was a satin. And I felt that some of the undertones didn't really go together because it had warm tones and it had cool tones, and I always struggled to make this work. And because that was the first thing I tried from the brand, I was very reluctant to try anything else from the brand. But then they started doing the smaller things that were cheaper than those bigger palettes, and then I started inching my ways back into Viseart. And I just have a completely renewed appreciation for this brand. However, I feel the things they are currently doing in the cardboard packaging is much more makeup consumer friendly rather than those pro palettes, which are much more makeup artist friendly. And I think that that's where it went wrong for me. I don't consider myself to be a makeup artist. I'm just someone who whacks some eyeshadow up at the start of her day and wears it all day, and I'm happy. I don't have to use this on clients. I don't want to use this on different skin tones. I have no intention to become a makeup artist and to like build up a kit that I can do makeup professionally. That's not my line of work. So that's why I think the palette I had chosen from Viseart and my makeup style were just a bit of a mismatch. I do not miss this palette. It's also not a palette that I'm looking into buying now that they're doing a smaller version. They do some really stunning other things. Those two new palettes they have come out with, those are pulling on my heartstrings. They are. I'm not gonna lie. They're on Boozy Shop, so I know I can buy them very, very soon. And they're probably going to be making an entrance into my collection at some point in the next couple of weeks. But yeah, the Viseart Sultry Muse was not really my vibe. It didn't really go with what I wanted from an eyeshadow palette, which is why I do not regret getting rid of this. The Kat Von D Monarch palette, and this is another one that I could have pulled out of my makeup memory box to show you, because I still have this lying about. Here's the deal. KVD Beauty, Kat Von D Beauty, as they used to be known. Kat Von D has nothing to do with the brand anymore, which is why they're called KVD. But they still do a lot of things. And they used to have this incredible line of eyeshadow palettes that for some reason were discontinued. I really don't know. And I still remember buying this thing. I was in Boston, which was 2012? Yes, 2012. I was visiting Boston and they had a Sephora, and that's where I picked up this palette. And I was like I was going around the store and trying to really find out what I liked, and this was like really back in the day before we really got cohesive color stories. Before brands were like, let's give them something that actually works together. However, the Monarch palette was one of the first palettes that actually had a bit of a concept behind it, because this palette has warm tones, cooler tones, and true neutrals all wrapped into one palette. You get 4 shades for each one of those sections, and you can create a look. It was stunning. However, I bought this before I really sort of honed in on what I feel works on me. And this was like right from like the start where we got more of the warm tone things going in. So I wore that orange that it has quite a lot. That was my favorite shade in the palette to wear. But I think this palette kind of helped me to figure out that the cooler tones worked better on me. So I ended up wearing that section a lot more. I was going gaga for the rose gold in this palette for the longest time, until I decided that also rose gold isn't necessarily my favorite shade ever. But yeah, this was a stunning palette. I had a lot of fun playing around with this. The reason why it's not gone from my house is because I adore the packaging, and because again, I feel this palette was so important in my makeup journey, like a lot of the Urban Decay stuff, in like teaching me how to do makeup and how it works on me and the formula. And since it's more than a decade old, I'm no longer willing to put it on my eyelids, but it is a very stunning palette and I do really enjoy it. So it's not gone, but it's not something I need to use anymore, so I don't regret decluttering it, but I still have it so I can look at it from time to time and go like, oh, you were so beautiful. And finally, this is a 2-for-1, a bit like the e.l.f. Bite Size where we had a 3-for-1, but this is the L'Oreal La Palette Nude, which came in different versions depending on where you lived. And I used to own both. I had the EU-based version, and I had the US-based version, which again, I bought on a trip when I was in the US, I think a little later. I remember picking this up from CVS in Miami, I think. But yeah, this palette, again, I'll pop up some pictures up on the screen if I can find them. But the EU-based version was nothing like the one that was sold in the US. First of all, the sizes were completely different, the color stories were completely different, and the formula was completely different. And this was some really, really good drugstore eyeshadow. Like this was like the height of drugstore eyeshadow around like the 2014, 2015 mark. We haven't had this level of really good drugstore eyeshadow palettes in a while. But yeah, these were good. Like these were nice. I felt that the US based version was a lot better than the one that was sold in the EU. The EU one was also more expensive than the US one, so was a little bit weird, but I don't regret getting rid of this. Essentially, it was like a Naked 3 kind of palette. I already mentioned how I feel about Naked 3. I have about 1 million times of these like mauve-y, cooler tones in my collection, and I really didn't need any more, so that's why these ended up being decluttered, but I was glad that I got to try them, and these were some lovely palettes. So those were the 10 palettes I wanted to chat to you about in today's video. Let me know in a comment down below, what is a palette you regret or don't regret decluttering at all? I had a lot of palettes in here today that I really don't regret getting rid of, which means that my decluttering decisions have been the right ones, which is what I'm happy with. I will have some more videos coming your way very, very soon, so please thumbs up this one and subscribe to the channel if you want to help me out. That would be lovely. For now, I would like to wish you a really, really happy day, and I hope to see you in my next one. Bye!